budget process an interest in coming back to the committee for a briefing. The plan today is that we are going to go through that briefing for about 30 to 40 minutes, give or take. So we're going to go through the whole entirety of the briefing, and then we'll open it up to questions, comments, and a little bit of dialogue. Obviously, legal housing discrimination and then de facto housing discrimination has been at the forefront of our discussions as we talk about equity and as we talk about land use policy and how we change and right the wrongs of the past, and how we acknowledge those dynamics of the past that got us to where we are today. So this is part of that undertaking, part of the goal, just to set expectations for today, is to talk through the significant work that has happened. Phase one, as we have talked about previously, is essentially inside the Beltway, some of the older and more established neighborhoods and communities, and then discuss what, if any, phase two there should be. There's a question of expanding the geography to outside the Beltway in a phase two. There's also potentially some opportunities to go a bit deeper into the existing geographic area that's already been covered and see where we take it from there. And so the purpose of today is to both have the presentation, but then also to have a dialogue and discuss what phase two might look like. So with that, unless there's any other comments from council staff, why don't we turn it over to Ms. Stern and the planning department, and we can go through the presentation.
Great, thank you so much. We're very happy to be here to brief the PHP committee on our mapping segregation project. As Chair Friesen noted, this is a very important effort that helps to support the county's focus on racial equity and understanding its history of racial segregation and discrimination in housing. This is also a very important effort for our department as part of our equity agenda for planning, and it was led by our Historic Preservation Office, which is a part of our countywide planning and policy division. And so I am joined here today with several staff, Jason Sartori, the chief of our countywide planning and policy division, Rebecca Ballo, Historic Preservation Office supervisor, and also John Lieberts, who's also with our Historic Preservation Office. They led the team that did this great project, and also want to acknowledge our new planning board chair, Artie Harris, who has joined us in the audience as well. So with that, I will turn it over to our team to walk us through this project.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Rebecca Ballo, for the record, Cultural Resources Supervisor with Montgomery Planning. On behalf of the department and the project team, I am pleased to be here and to share our report with you this afternoon. So as you can see here on the slide, our project had multiple objectives, but we believe that the most fruitful means of examining racial segregation within patterns of land use came from an analysis of racial restrictive covenants. As Director Stern just said, the project was first described as a key goal of the Planning Department's Equity Agenda in Planning in 2020, with the recommendation that the Historic Preservation Office explore developing what we called at the time a historical redlining mapping tool. That initial scope developed into what we now call the Mapping Segregation Project. For our part, it was an effort to better answer the question, what are the redlined communities in Montgomery County? Given the historic settlement patterns in our suburban communities, from the earliest platted areas in Silver Spring to the streetcar suburbs and later to the auto-centric suburbs, this question did not seem to capture the issue of what does legal racial discrimination in the suburbs around the central city of Washington, D.C. really look like. So we believe that the maps and the data that we've developed as part of this project have given us a better framework to discuss and examine this legacy. So in the presentation today, this largely tracks with the white paper that was part of your packet and provided by Ms. Dunn, but we also have additional information about the maps that was also not in the white paper. So I'll begin today by describing the different federal agencies that promulgated discriminatory housing practices in their policies and lending programs, discuss the proliferation of racial restrictive covenants, discuss the Tushin case that galvanized the Jewish community in Washington, D.C. and across the country, highlight civil rights figures from Montgomery County, and then I'll discuss the results of a case study where we explored the relationship of racial covenants with Black home ownership in Tacoma Park, followed by our key takeaways. So we always like to start the presentation with this slide. It depicts the dramatic shift in the population of Montgomery County from 1890 to 1960. So the project began again with a desire to discover through the land records how the geography of racial exclusion and racial steering was created and enforced in the county, and the impacts this had foremost on the African American community. The researchers were also directed to record all discriminatory language found in the records, including restrictions against any racial, religious, or ethnic minority group. When we started, we were aware of these demographics for the African American community that you can see here on the slide. We will see later in the presentation the breakdown of the restrictive covenants as they were applied to various groups, but in all instances, 100% of the racial restrictive covenants targeted African Americans. So you can see here again, black residents went from comprising 36% of the population of the county in 1890 to 3% in 1960. During that period, the white population increased by over 310,000 people, while the black population increased by only 1,842. The team set forth to explain why this occurred and share how discrimination targeting racial and ethnic communities by the government and private citizens happened at nearly all levels of society in Montgomery County. So I want to put this in context for the council. This is not just an initiative happening here in Montgomery County or here in Washington, D.C. So historians and demographers nationwide are exploring primarily 3 different avenues to discuss and analyze the history and legacy of legal discriminatory housing practices. Most scholarship has examined the actions of 2 federal agencies, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, the HOLC, and the Federal Housing Administration. Both organizations legitimized and spread redlining at the federal level and drove real estate lending and building practices to the detriment of people of color. Again, redlining refers to mortgage lending decisions based on the location or physical characteristics of a property and its owners. Fewer researchers are documenting the use and impact of racial restrictive covenants, likely due to the labor required for such a study. Racial restrictive covenants are private contractual agreements that prohibit the sale, rent, lease, or occupation of property to particular racial, ethnic, and religious groups. You can find this information in the land records in places such as in the deeds, the Declaration of Covenants, and other agreements. So we started with the HOLC. In the 1920s, home ownership remained out of reach for many working class and middle class families. Mortgages required a substantial down payment, interest-only fee schedules, and full repayment of the loan within a short period. The Great Depression, falling wages, and increased costs further worsened the depressed real estate industry. And in 1933, President Roosevelt and Congress created the Homeowners Loan Corporation as part of the New Deal. The agency focused on acquiring distressed residential mortgages from homeowners who couldn't make mortgage payments or were in danger of default. The HOLC then provided owners with new amortized mortgages with a 15-year repayment schedule and favorable lending terms. In the last couple of years, researchers used local land records to analyze mortgages from the HOLC. An analysis of 3 metropolitan areas suggested that the agency may have provided loans to black residents proportional to their level of home ownership. Race, however, clearly played a role as the agency identified the racial makeup of applicants' neighborhoods and constrained opportunities within the existing patterns of segregation. So in 1935, the HOLC moved to manage, sell, and liquidate its real estate holdings, which it acquired through default. The agency only existed really for a very brief period of time, about just 2-3 years. The agency, but it was during this phase that they existed, and after the agency had insured up to 90% of its loans, that it created the notorious residential security maps, or the redlining maps. The maps identified black communities with having a lower investment potential, higher risk, and shaded the areas red. How these maps were used by the HOLC and distributed to the FHA and other banking industries is debated among historians, but it is clear that the maps provide archival evidence of lending risk perception in the mid-1930s. Historians and demographers have used these maps to analyze the legacy of redlining. We are unable to consult this resource as the residential security map never existed for Washington, D.C., or has been lost. And this is something that historians have been grappling with for the last 45 years as we've tried to find this information for Washington, D.C., and it does appear just to be lost. It's absent from the record. So moving on then to the FHA, the other source material. So in 1934, President Roosevelt signed the National Housing Act, which established the Federal Housing Administration. The agency goals included increasing homeownership, reviving the stalled construction industry and providing an economically sound, publicly sponsored system of mortgage insurance. The FHA had a profound nationwide impact on residential racial segregation, as it overwhelmingly insured loans for new construction in mostly white suburban communities. The organization created an underwriting manual, a risk evaluation system for itself and private lenders that appraised communities throughout the country. The FHA perceived neighborhood change, specifically racial transitions, as a cause for diminished property values, and advocated for the inclusion of racial restrictive covenants as preventing decline in a neighborhood's value. In the late 1930s, the agency conducted their own surveys and produced their own series of evaluation maps. So very few of these survive, but a residential sub-area map for Washington, D.C. does include parts of the Down County area. So you can see here, this is a screenshot of the map, and it's also included in the GIS layer. So the planning department has overlaid the FHA map on the GIS. The map identified only one black community at Tacoma Park in the Down County planning area, which they graded as H, the lowest grade for housing. And the language for this category, we included it here on the slide. I know it is somewhat it's difficult to read at this scale, but it is there on the slide. However, there are several errors in this map. The surveyors failed to acknowledge the existence of two major black communities in Littonsville and River Road. These errors were evident when the project team overlaid black homeowners in 1940, who are represented here with individual pins. So this calls into question the accuracy of the map and how it should be used at all to analyze black homeownership. So our staff focused on racial restrictive covenants because of two conditions. First, as I said, the HOLC maps either never existed for Washington, D.C. or are lost. Second, the FHA map, which is shown here on the right, so this is the blow-up of the one that you saw before, was limited to sections of the Down County and had major omissions. As a result, there are fewer opportunities to illustrate or analyze the impacts of these policies. On the other hand, the racial restrictive covenants are part of land records, remain intact for the entire planning area, and are accessible to the project team. So real estate developers, neighborhood associations, and property owners used racial restrictive covenants to create homogeneous white neighborhoods and prohibit home ownership and occupancy by non-whites with the belief that this would maintain or improve residential property values. It is important to reiterate that these covenants are not enforced by the local government, but require your neighbor to bring other parties to court. The Supreme Court ruled these covenants were unenforceable in 1948, but private property owners could continue to write them into the land records until the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968. So again, talking about the work that's being done on a national scale and then our work here in the county. So there's two ways this work is really being done nationally. One is a parcel by parcel analysis. You take every individual parcel, the area you're looking at, you take every record back to the late 1800s, and look for racial covenants in the deeds. This is a very time-consuming process. The other method is to supplement this approach with machine learning. Computer AI searches for keywords, but individuals still need to fact-check, document, and log the data. So you may capture some covenants, but it could still take years of work. The Mapping Prejudice Project, being conducted out of the University of Minneapolis, Minnesota, is the most comprehensive analysis of racial restrictive covenants in the country. This slide shows the total number of volunteer hours, deeds transcribed, and number of volunteers involved on the project as shown on their website. So you can see 33,000 volunteer hours, 80,000 deeds transcribed, and over 6,000 volunteers involved in that project. So, the team approached this work at the subdivision plat level with a sampling method for each plat. We had GIS send us all the plats within the Down County planning area, as shown partially on the left. When you click on one of the polygons in the GIS, you can pull up an actual plat, and here we can get the name of the owner or company that subdivided the land. Then we use the land records to see if that person or corporation recorded covenants. So due to a limited budget and staff, we approached racial restrictive covenants at the subdivision plat level with a sampling method for the 1,763 plats recorded prior to 1953. Staff found that properties associated with 728 of the recorded plats, so that's about 41%, included racial restrictive covenants. An additional 63 of the record plats, about 4%, likely included properties with racial restrictive covenants. As we look at this map, for subdivisions recorded between 1904 and 1952, it is important to remember several key points. 1, this map shows trends from the selective sampling. It does not document covenants at the parcel-by-parcel level. The public would need to conduct deed research to confirm whether racial covenants were placed on their individual properties. But with that being said, the red shaded areas had racial restrictive covenants. The pink shaded areas possibly had covenants, and what we mean by that is if there were multiple, if there were areas like sections 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9 have racial restrictive covenants, but 5 did not, or we couldn't say that. We put that in the pink area. And if you have more questions about that methodology, John can answer that question later on. But the areas shaded blue did not welcome Black residents, even though they did not have covenants recorded in those deeds that we could find. De facto and de jure segregation occurred throughout the county. So this previous map often raises questions about all the gaps. So here's the same map, but the gray shaded areas that includes all recorded subdivisions after 1953. So these are the recorded plats that we did not investigate. So record plats from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and onward. So this slide shows the information the user sees when clicking on a polygon on our map. So you're able to pull up the survey plat, property owner, covenant text, groups discriminated against, etc. And we have the map here on the computer too, if council members have any questions about how the data is presented or anything in the data tables, we can answer that. So now I'm going to walk through the spread of racial covenants in Montgomery County. So this map shows new subdivisions created between 1904 and 1909. In the Down County, developers and owners used racial restrictive covenants sparingly at first. Examples include the 3rd and 4th additions to Chevy Chase and Silver Spring Park. Here's the language from the county's first known recorded racial covenant in 1904. Robert Holt Easley, a real estate speculator from Virginia, subdivided Silver Spring and Silver Spring Park and added the displayed racial restrictive covenant. These covenants combined racial segregation with nuisance law, public health, and ideas about racial purity. In the next decade, 1910 to 1919, real estate developers included racial restrictive covenants in properties associated with 12 of the 36 recorded plats, so about 33%. Subdivisions included Edgewood, Bradley Hills, Cabin John Park, Chevy Chase Park, and Hillcrest in Tacoma Park. So here on the screen we have real estate advertisements from the time. The advertisements for these communities reflected segregationist attitudes. For Cabin John Park, the American Land Company noted, quote, suitable restrictions, access to the District of Columbia, health benefits, and the importance of home ownership. The company offered the first 100 properties at auction to the highest white bidder. Historians suggest that covenants were used in affordable neighborhoods to restrict people of color from purchasing homes when the price of real estate itself didn't prevent Black ownership. Developers used racial covenants almost as an amenity to convince prospective white homeowners to purchase properties in the suburbs. A false narrative that racial homogeneity sustained property values had taken hold in the minds of white Americans. So 2 national events further increased the propagation of racial restrictive covenants nationwide and in the county. In 1917, the Supreme Court decision in Buchanan versus Worley prohibited racial zoning. Several southern cities had enacted zoning ordinances that required separate residential areas for its Black and white residents. While racial zoning failed, developers and owners recognized the usefulness of the legal system to enforce housing segregation and concluded that agreements between 2 private parties permitted by restrictive covenants faced less judicial scrutiny than wholesale government-enacted segregation. So I included on this slide the main points that the city of Louisville argued in Buchanan versus Worley, and the ideas about deterioration of property values would remain a core idea of discriminatory housing practices. So during this same period, the Great Migration led thousands of Black Southerners to flee violence and poor living conditions and move to northern cities. By the 19-teens, Washington, D.C. was a cultural and financial center for African Americans with 110,000 residents, which accounted for approximately 25% of the city's population. Many Black Washingtonians had government jobs as clerks and other bureaucratic positions, and there was a small upper-class community. Racial tensions were elevated as housing and employment opportunities were limited, competition increased, and newspapers stoked fear with sensationalized and false stories of violence against white women by black men. In addition, black soldiers returning from World War I had experienced better treatment overseas and pushed back against unfair policies. In 1919, the, quote, Red Summer marked a pattern of white on black violence that occurred throughout the country. In July, a 4-day race war erupted in Washington, D.C., where black residents resisted and retaliated. Many white Americans, however, emerged from the violence that summer with the opinion that the nation needed more segregation. The slide includes false and sensationalized headlines that ran in newspapers across the country. As these events unfolded, white real estate developers and residents of northern and western cities moved to isolate the black population by all means available, including racial steering and racial restrictive covenants. In 1924, the National Association of Real Estate Boards endorsed the use of such practices in its Code of Ethics as shown on the left. In 1926, the Supreme Court further institutionalized the use of racial restrictive covenants when it rejected a challenge to the practice in the case Corrigan versus Buckley. So returning now to our map analysis, between 1920 and 1933, there is an increase in the percent of record plots associated with racial restrictive covenants. Major subdivisions included Battery Park, Blair, North Woodside, and E. Brookley's addition to Silver Spring, among many others. During this period, covenants also spread to other ethnic and religious groups. In 1932, covenants adjacent to Seven Oaks included restrictions against people of Asian descent. The following year, the Loughborough Development Corporation discriminated against people of Jewish descent. The term, quote, Semitic races appeared in almost all of the conveyances associated with properties that discriminated against Jews. While the racial description of Semitic included various groups, again, the developers intended to discriminate primarily against Jewish people. The next period on the map represents the creation of the Federal Housing Administration in 1934, prior to the Supreme Court's ruling in Shelley versus Kramer in 1948. The court found in the case that the judicial enforcement of racial restrictive covenants violated the 14th Amendment. While they would no longer be enforced by the state, such covenants could still be written into deeds as a form of deterrence. So during this time frame, properties associated with 53% of the record plats included racial restrictive covenants. There were 5 times as many covenants as in the previous period. The number of racial restrictive covenants targeting Jewish residents increased dramatically in this period. This trend corresponds with anti-immigrant and anti-Jewish rhetoric spreading across America and the start of the expanding Jewish community in Montgomery County. Subdivisions that included such covenants included Bannockburn Heights, Bradley Woods, Locust Hill Estates, Westmoreland Hills, and others. Most of these subdivisions are located on the western side of the down county. Racial covenants against Jewish residents culminated with a lawsuit filed in Bannockburn Heights. In 1947, 5 of 52 households filed a lawsuit in Montgomery County Circuit Court in Rockville to force Lucille Tushin, a Christian, to evict Aaron Tushin, her Jewish husband, from their jointly owned family home on Wilson Lane. The suit claimed, quote, irreparable damage caused by his occupancy in violation of the restrictive covenant. The Tushin family requested and received legal assistance from the Anti-Defamation League. So this case in Montgomery County galvanized national attention from the Anti-Defamation League, which announced a 3-point program of legal action against racial and religious discrimination in October of 1947. The legislative campaign was intended to, quote, stimulate public opinion against the segregation and ghettoization of minority groups, and to erase racial and religious restrictive covenants in real estate deeds and leases. As a central tenet of this new campaign of legal action, the ADL emphasized that real estate brokers have, quote, exploded the myth that property values decrease when restrictive covenants do not exist. Additionally, in 1947, the Anti-Defamation League published a paper chronicling anti-Semitism in the United States. The survey was prepared by Arnold Forster, National Director, and the staff of the Civil Rights Division of the ADL of B'nai B'rith. The Tushin case was described in this document for the national readership. Washington, D.C. was also highlighted as part of this project when they were looking at regional and legislative trends. So after local and national coverage of the incident and community support of the family, including a lead editorial from the Washington Post, which underscored the anti-Americanness of the plaintiff's actions, the residents dropped the lawsuit. One interview with a neighbor highlighted the emotions surrounding the legal case within the Bannockburn Heights neighborhood. In this off-the-record interview, the woman said, quote, "My husband and I were looking for a suitable house for us and our children for many months without success. Then we found this house in Bannockburn Heights and it was just what we wanted. When we sat down to sign the contract, we discovered for the first time that there was a covenant against Jews. This was contrary to everything my husband and I were brought up to believe. We know how mean bigotry is. But because we had so much bad luck in looking for a house, we finally decided to sign, thinking that the whole issue would be academic and we could still enjoy our many Jewish friends. But now it has become real, and I'm ashamed and humiliated." So continuing on, the project team reviewed all the Down County planning area plats recorded between 1949 and 1952. We collected data for 4 years after the Supreme Court found covenants unenforceable. So properties associated with 126 of the 416 recorded plats included racial restrictive covenants. So again, about 30%. However, properties associated with 50 of the 126 record plats noted subject to existing covenants from previous land conveyances. We can go into the re-subdivision process further if there are any questions about that. So the Shelley versus Kramer decision appears to have minimal initial impact to the demographics of Montgomery County with respect to Black homeownership. White flight from the District of Columbia contributed to another massive population increase in the suburbs. And between 1950 and 1960, Montgomery County's population increased by almost 100%. The white population increased at 113. The white population increased by 113%, and the Black population grew, but at nowhere near the same rate. The Black population went from 10,330 people to 11,527 residents, so it's an increase of about 11.5%. During this period, the FHA slowly amended their policy to no longer permit racial covenants in the deeds in 1950, but the agency remained silent on who a property owner could sell or rent to. Therefore, voluntary discrimination remained in full force. The actions of the federal government and real estate developers, however, were strengthened by the decisions of individual community members, the hands-off approach of the local government, and the apathy of the general public. So then moving into the 1950s, one of the really interesting things about this history is that when it comes to this history of discrimination in single-family housing, but also in rental housing, there's a lot in the congressional record. People were fairly regularly testifying in front of Congress, being called by congressmen for witnesses for these various issues. So here in 1959, a man named Eugene Sugarman, who was the chairman of the New York Regional Advisory Board of the Anti-Defamation League, was invited to give testimony to Congress on housing discrimination. And he noted in his testimony several suburban developments, some here in Montgomery County, that were still perceived to bar Jewish residents, Shelley versus Kramer notwithstanding. He also noted the tacit gentlemen's agreements that still existed in Kenwood subdivisions, and he noted the Miller subdivisions in Sumner south of River Road as particular offenders. So this is a map. The W.C. and A.N. Miller Company, who subdivided Sumner, again, south of River Road in Bethesda, was a well-documented and notorious practitioner of racial restrictive covenants against Black and Jewish residents. The developers controlled the racial makeup of the community by requiring the developer to be the exclusive agent for reselling the property, or by requiring their approval upon the resale. Throughout the country in the 1950s, Black Americans who attempted to purchase homes in previously covenanted areas continued to experience protests, threats, intimidation, vandalism, arson, and violence. Also, the withholding of financing from mortgage lenders or unfavorable terms, real estate professionals who were unwilling to show properties in all-white communities for fear of censure or boycotts, and agreements between real estate professionals, lenders, and improvement associations to prohibit sales to people of color. So in addition, the Reverend Charles N. Mason, past chairman of the Silver Spring Ministerial Association's Social Action Committee, stated, quote, "The problem we feel is not being squarely faced by people in the suburbs. It is the general collusion among the whole community, all the agents, not just real estate agents, to face up to its responsibility in the maintaining of the segregated pattern of housing." So our report goes into more detail about the civil rights movement in Montgomery County, but I wanted to share two examples of families who persevered. Dr. James Roberts, an accomplished obstetrician and gynecologist at Friedman Hospital, desired to move to White Oak in the late 1950s. When he tried to purchase a house, local banks denied his loan, and members of the Civic Association tried to purchase the property from under him when it became public that he intended to buy. Dr. Roberts would not be deterred. He acquired the property, and he lived there until his death. Then we have Mary Betters, formerly Mary Williams, who was president of the Montgomery County branch of the NAACP in the late 1950s. She documented her family's struggle to find housing in an all-white neighborhood near Veers Mill. In 1961, the real estate agent quoted the Williams family a higher price than advertised and refused to accept their deposit. The owner of the agency later tried to deter the couple from purchasing the property and claimed his company would go out of business if they sold to black purchasers. In the end, the agency released the property owners from their contract with the firm so that the family could sell directly to the Williamses. And on the screen, we have an excerpt of her testimony, also before a congressional hearing about the threats of violence and intimidation that she and her family faced. So the efforts of the African American community, civil rights and fair housing activists, and other allies led to the passage of the public accommodation and fair housing legislation here in Montgomery County in the 1960s. So this is a summary slide showing discrimination against particular groups of people. All of the covenants the team documented discriminated against African Americans, and a quarter of the covenants discriminated against people of Jewish descent. Less than 2% of the covenants discriminated against Asian Americans. Throughout the country in the 1950s, black Americans who attempted to purchase homes in previously covenanted areas continued to experience protests, threats, intimidation, vandalism, arson, and violence. Again, the withholding of financing from mortgage lenders or unfavorable terms. Again, the real estate professionals who are unwilling to show them the properties, and the continued gentlemen's agreements between white property owners and real estate developers. So taking a little bit of a side path here, as I said before, when we had them looking at the covenants, we decided to have them record all of the data that they were seeing. So not just the racial covenanted information, but the project team also recorded single-family housing covenants in the land records. More often than not, there were numerous covenants within a particular property or subdivision. So one of the common covenants which further limited communities along socioeconomic and racial lines were the single-family housing covenants. So this is a map of the single-family housing covenants that the team recorded in the Down County planning area, and you can see it really, it's east to west, it's across the region. Users of the map can examine the following information when clicking on a polygon. It includes subdivision name, covenant text, and expiration. The expiration is important here because these covenants could still be active or could still run with the land. For example, this covenant for Woodside Park that we have pulled up here stated that the covenants remained in effect until the first day of January 1950, when they shall cease and terminate. Other covenants provided less specific language. So here are all the single-family housing covenants that had no explicit expiration, and so potentially could still be active in these neighborhoods. So here are where the single-family covenants existed absent any racial restrictive covenants. Again, but it's important to remember that these covenants were another layer that dictated exclusivity of the suburbs along racial and socioeconomic lines. So while this was happening, the department was also kicking off the Tacoma Park Minor Master Plan Amendment. So in support of that plan amendment, we focused on Tacoma Park and used the area as a test case for potential future phases of the project. So there were fewer racial restrictive covenants percentage-wise in Tacoma Park, but we wanted to explore the interplay between the growth of the black communities and the use of such covenants. To accomplish this, the team tracked black home ownership in Tacoma Park in the year 1900, 1920, 1940, and 1950. The process included reviewing each page of the census, recording black homeowners and renters, and cross-referencing each owner with the land records to find an associated property. The deed record would then provide us with a plat, block, and lot number, which we would then use with the plat record and MC Atlas to determine the current address. We had to take these steps as most of the censuses before 1950 didn't list an address. And if it did, the address doesn't correlate anymore to our present-day street addresses and house numbering system. So this next series of maps provided a timeline of covenants with black homeownership. The first known black homeowners in Tacoma Park were Louis and Grace Thomas, who worked as a caterer and nurse, respectively. Mr. Thomas acquired the property at 15 Montgomery Avenue from Annie Barber in 1896. The 1900 United States Census lists them as the only black homeowners in Tacoma Park, but 7 other families rented in nearby houses. There were 40 black residents at that time. The black community had its period of greatest growth between 1900 and 1920. The population grew to 203 residents, which was an increase of over 400%. 13 families owned property and an additional 27 families rented. The black-owned homes were dispersed throughout Tacoma Park, and only one racial restrictive covenant existed at Hillcrest, which was subdivided in 1911. Between 1920 and 1940, black homeownership in Tacoma Park continued to increase. By 1940, there were almost an equal number of homeowners and renters, so 33 owners and 34 renters. The overall population expanded to over 300 residents. And during this period, however, properties associated with at least 18 subdivisions included racial restrictive covenants, which channeled and concentrated the black community's growth into 3 distinct areas. These became known as the Hill, located at Oswego, Geneva, and Ritchie Avenues, the Bottom, near Colby Avenue off Sligo Creek Parkway, and an unnamed smaller community on Poplar Avenue. The Hill included the First Baptist Church of Tacoma Park, built in 1922, and the Tacoma Park Rosenwald School, constructed in 1928. In 1950, black homeownership in Tacoma Park had increased to its highest levels in the 20th century. There were 56 owners and 27 renters. The population continued to increase with 445 total residents, but the inclusion of racial restrictive covenants in the previous decade continued to isolate and concentrate the community. So we have each of these homeowners located as pins in the map. So clicking on the pins for each black homeowner will also pull up detailed information about that person and the building on the site. So we have the primary residence, the number of people in each household, occupations of the residents, the year the owners acquired the property, who provided the mortgages, and whether the house is still standing. This information will be invaluable as we consider these areas for any type of historic designation or undertake master plans within these boundaries, and we need to give more context about the history of these neighborhoods. So there are 2 other examples of discriminatory housing practices in Tacoma Park that I'd like to highlight. One relates to reactive racial restrictive covenants, and the others to the actions of a local civic association. So the blue outlined area here shows the approximate boundaries of a reactive racial restrictive covenant. So these are different from the covenants that we've been discussing. On May 3rd, 1947, the property owners in Tacoma Park agreed to a declaration of covenants with the sole purpose of restricting the sale of property to black residents. While in other cases, it was an individual owner who was putting covenants on properties at the time of subdivision, this was an after-the-fact declaration agreed to by each private party within the community. So our methodology does not capture these cases comprehensively, but they clearly had an impact on the growth and development of Tacoma Park. So in addition, the Lincoln Valley Citizens Association took another step to further isolate the black community within their boundary. The association bylaws limited membership to Caucasians only. Therefore, the black residents on Colby Avenue within the boundary of this Lincoln Valley Citizens Association had to form their own civic association. So the success of the case study led the team to expand our documentation of black homeownership to the entire Down County planning area, but only for the 1940 federal census. We couldn't do all the other years, and we thought that was a good test case. So we identified a total of 97 black homeowners, which accounted for 12% of the 802 black homeowners county-wide, as shown here in the chart. So there were the 4 main communities: Littonsville, Tacoma Park, Hawkins Lane, and River Road. So here's a map showing the relationship between black homeownership in 1940 and all racial restrictive covenants. Here's the map with the pins representing the black homeowners. So similar to the other maps, you can click on the pin to pull up information about these individuals. And this map adds the location of single-family housing covenants, which precluded the black homeowners as well. So that is really everything about the body of the work. However, I do want to give you an update about our outreach with the public, feedback we have received, and engagement. There have been newspaper newspaper and local interest articles about the project. The project has been featured in the Washington Business Journal, Bethesda Magazine, Washington Jewish Week, and the Washington Post. Between the planning board hearing in December 2022 and just a month, January 2023, the mapping tool had nearly 12,000 views, with the majority near the release of the Washington Post article. I am told by our GIS team that this is quite a number for the planning department, and maybe, I think, unprecedented for a historic preservation project. So we were really, really pleased to see that. Our team has also held meetings with the City of Alexandria Planning Department, with the Capital Jewish Museum. The Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors asked us to give a webinar. Mr. Lieberts gave a conference panel with Montgomery history on this topic, and John and I have also lectured at neighborhood associations this spring and this summer. We have a few scheduled for this fall. And there's also an upcoming briefing for the City of Tacoma Park in September. And I'd also like to point out on the slide, the boards here, after our meeting with the Capital Jewish Museum, they have opened a new exhibit about discrimination against Jewish people in the whole Washington, D.C. metro region. And they used the maps and the research, and the Mapping Segregation Project is a prominent part of the museum exhibit. And we were delighted to see that. Part of the idea was we aggregate this data, we talk with other historians and researchers, and then they are able to use it for their own projects. For the next slide, this is a slide that we often show to the neighborhood associations. It gives the steps. It's the State of Maryland Restrictive Covenant Modification Intake Sheet. People can fill out this form and have the covenants struck from the records for their property. So this is part of our public engagement, that we let people in the communities know that this form exists. We walk through with them how to fill it out, how to submit it. And we've had a lot of great feedback that people have been doing this, and people want to learn more about how to remove the covenants from their properties. So our key takeaways from phase one of this project. So real estate developers working in Montgomery County employed racial restrictive covenants and other tools of de facto segregation throughout the 20th century, deliberately restricting where African Americans, Jews, and Asian residents could buy homes and live. Although direct impacts can be difficult to reliably measure, we still see the intergenerational effects playing out today. Even where codified racism was seemingly absent, voluntary discriminatory practices abounded, with homeowners, landlords, developers, and others dictating who could buy or rent which properties where, and threatening violent actions against undesirable potential residents. This race-based discrimination limited opportunities for the Black community to build intergenerational wealth through housing ownership at the same rate as white residents, and likely severely impacted the growth of the African American population in the county at large. This project has resulted in the county having a more accurate, documented understanding of the history of racial segregation, and all of this data is mapped and publicly available. Also, being able to center the stories of African American and Jewish property owners and neighborhood activists demonstrates how the research can highlight these individual experiences. Having the data available will provide useful information for the planning department, historians, and interested residents, and will help to inform future policy and planning efforts in furtherance of Montgomery Planning's equity agenda in planning. So we are ending with this slide for discussion, Q&A, to answer any questions, to also discuss options for phase two and potential next steps. It's apparent to us, to the historians working on this, that the legacy of these discriminatory patterns in the land records, it certainly extends beyond the Down County region. So targeted research on Veers Mill Road and in other areas, such as in Washington Grove, Emory Grove, Quince Orchard, and Kengar, Kensington, are just a few examples in the Mid-County where these same patterns are evident. Other communities in the phase one target area could potentially receive the same level of detailed mapping and survey work as the Tacoma Park African American neighborhoods. There are other patterns related to environmental justice, industrial zoning, the development of rental apartment complexes, and roadway public facility siting that could also be explored in the Down County region or incorporated into a larger study project for the Down County and Mid-County. So in summary, we're pleased to present this all to you. We look forward to your questions and your leadership on this discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, terrific work, really extraordinary and incredibly helpful as we grapple with these very challenging historic issues. Obviously, the results are sobering. I wouldn't say they're surprising, but they're certainly sobering. And really appreciate all of the efforts that the planning department has taken, the intentionality that has been undertaken as part of this project. So if we could, I'll just ask colleagues, let's first focus on the project itself. Any questions or clarifications that we have about the project and what has been presented in terms of the content, and then we can turn it to next steps and have a discussion of where do we go from here and what is the interest of the committee to ask the planning department in terms of, you know, leaning inward towards the geographic area that's already been covered, and next steps, as you heard from staff, or the idea of doing a similar mapping tool in another geographic area outside the Beltway. But let's take it one step at a time just to be able to focus the conversation a bit. So why don't we open it up? Are there any questions or comments about the project itself? I'll start, Councilmember Jawando.
Well, I just want to echo the thanks and all the work that went into this, and I certainly, you know, as was said, I think we kind of had a general sense, but this certainly puts meat on the bones of, you know, what the scale, scope, depth of what happened. And I think when you started that first chart, you know, everyone kind of anecdotally knew that, but I think just seeing it visually, that, you know, African Americans, for example, were a third of the population of the county, and then went to 3% in that short, you know, 60-year period or whatever. I think it was 60 years or so, 70 years. It's just it's sobering, and it also confirms what you just said, and you rattled off some of the next steps of, like, you know, this was intentionally done, right? And so we have to be just as intentional about how to make sure we're correcting for this. So my first question was related to the inflow and outflow of various types of residents, for example. So, you know, and how that relates to our neighbors, right? In the history of, for example, like I'll just take East County, which borders Prince George's County at one of the portions. Obviously, Tacoma Park does as well, and how when people were kind of, did you look into, like, when that outflow happened, or the, you know, kind of restrictions happened, and as housing was being built, where the migration patterns of formerly enslaved African Americans and Jewish residents, others who were restricted, Asian, you know, and then how they ended up in the places that they are now, or over time, how they ended up back in those places. You know, did you look at that at all, or when that happened? Are there any charts over like how that changed over time?
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. We did not specifically look at that. We know from other studies from the Historic Preservation Office and from Montgomery history that the kinship communities in Montgomery County remained very, very strong in the 1950s, 1960s, and even today, the Scotland community, the Emery Grove community, these are still here in Montgomery County, and these kinship relationships still remain, even as people have moved, and this is anecdotally, people have moved to Germantown, Gaithersburg, other places within the region. But no, the project really, that kind of research really stopped in the 1940s, 1950s. We've discussed internally that it would be interesting to understand between 1950 and 2000. This really gets into more census, demographic, population, anthropological work, as you've just noted, that it would be interesting to understand that better, particularly after 1968, when there are a number of different racial and ethnic minorities moving to Montgomery County. It's really a boom time, also with changing immigration laws at the national level. That's my sort of long way of saying no. Yeah. We were not able to get to that as part of this project.
Yeah. But obviously this history that you did go into obviously impacts that history, and so I think, yeah, so I'll hold off on where we need to go, but no, that's helpful.
Can I just add something?
please.
Just to make sure the committee is aware. So once we completed this phase one research, we did do some additional work looking at the current demographics of the areas that had racially restrictive covenants. Because one question that came up as we were talking to some was, is there an impact on the people who live there today? And the short answer is it's difficult to answer that question because of just various changes that have occurred over the previous decades. Obviously, these types of covenants are illegal. We have the Fair Housing Act, so there, the WMATA coming, other types of infrastructure has really affected people's abilities, not only ability, but decisions in terms of where they could live. But we did actually go and do that additional research to see if there was a clear picture, and the answer, it really isn't clear. And it's also very difficult to be able to trace, if there was a black family or a Jewish family that wanted to move into a neighborhood that had a racially restrictive covenant and they didn't move there. So how do you, track where they ended up going and sort of what's the impact of people not being able to move into those particular areas? The other piece of it too is that some communities that did have racially restrictive covenants have very diverse populations now. So again, the sort of the impact on what we see today is it's not clear to be able to sort of unpack all of that.
Well, yeah, and that's a great point, because you take when I saw the Dr. Roberts, I can't remember, from White Oak, which is obviously one of the epicenters of the black community now, but both black immigrant and African American, that when he moved there, obviously it was not, and there was that he had to be one of the trailblazers. But it also points to how the policies of exclusion and where in direction have changed over time, right? Like, so we talked about in the context of Thrive, the decisions that were made intentionally to not, for example, put infrastructure or businesses in the eastern part of the county, right, as a reason of why we needed to pass Thrive, and how that led to, there's affordability of housing and where people who, if you look at the racial wealth gap, I'm assuming that might have been one of the reasons why you had a large number of people of color move to the eastern part of the county. But I don't know, right? Like, I think it's just something to look at, because this is one set of policies, but there were other decisions that impacted those trends, and I do think it's something worth looking at. I'll ask one other, because I could ask you questions all day, but the other thing I wanted to ask about related to the methodology was, did we look at FHA insured mortgages in Montgomery County?
Sure, John Lieberts. So for the FHA mortgages, it's hard for us to track them in the land records. There's other jurisdictions like Baltimore City where they nicely put all the FHA mortgages in the back of the books. So you could easily analyze who got loans in what areas from the FHA. But for us, it's just throughout the land records, and so we did not have a path forward to analyze those.
Got it. Okay. And then on C12, you talked about you weren't able to examine like the foreclosed HOLC properties and if they were sold to black residents. Is that something you could research at a later time, or is it just time didn't allow, or is the information available?
I think we could look further into that, but I think the numbers were so low to begin with. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure how fruitful the investigation would be for the amount of time it would take. And that was what we had the 400 or so loans that we could investigate into, and it was such a small number. It was hard to make any type of statistical analysis from what we were able to find. But it was clear that the discriminatory practices continued.
Got it. And then last question for now: D.C. and Howard County and Prince George's, our neighboring counties, are they doing a similar type of analysis, and can we collaborate with them to understand? Because these patterns are obviously connected because we're all bordering. So I just wondered about what's happened there and the opportunity there.
We have collaborated with our colleagues in Washington, D.C. So there's a Mapping Segregation D.C. project that we can send you the website. That was That was not done by the DC government. It was done by a consultant, and there was a consortium of not-for-profits that came together, and that research continues. Similar to the University of Minneapolis work, it's done at a parcel-by-parcel level, and they have really been trailblazers in this region in starting that work. We learned a lot from them in terms of how they organized their website, how they organized their methodology. We met with them in the beginning of the project to understand their methodology, and they in turn have been looking at our results here, particularly the covenanted information against the variety of racial groups discriminated against in the suburbs and how those numbers compare with the central city. So that has been a really good working relationship. I do not know that the other local jurisdictions that you mentioned, Prince George's, Howard County, and Baltimore, you said, I do not know that they are undertaking this same work. They were not when we began the project.
Right. Yeah, just thinking in my region forward hat, like as we're trying to, even Frederick County, all the people that are bordering us where we have these migration patterns over time, and it's obviously a relationship, but just be interesting. This is great. I really appreciate the work, and I'll stop for round one right now.
Thank you, and Councilmember Funny-Gonzalez.
I think the whole presentation was a reminder that human beings can be so evil and awful, how ignorance gets to policy and destroys communities. So that is what came to mind as you guys were presenting. My questions are really for the second part, but I do want to have a follow-up from something that Councilmember Yowondo said on the FHA loans, and you mentioned that in Baltimore the data was more accessible. What is it? Is there something that they do, a policy that is going on in Baltimore that we don't have, or what's going on there?
No, it was just a historical luck of how they organized their records back in the early 1900s. So they just so happened to put all of them in the back. So they did it in batches, and we just kind of integrated it through the.
Got it.
Yeah, so it's from the earlier records.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm gonna save the second part until you.
Appreciate that. I just a couple follow-ups. The first is, so you started to talk a little bit about some initial cursory looks at areas with covenants and areas without covenants and the current demographics about that. Could you just talk a little bit more about it? Like, are we talking about a case study, or this was more just cursory level looking into it and gleaning some top level information, or just talk a little bit more about what you've done? Because I was particularly interested in knowing what, if any, opportunities there would be there, but it'd be helpful to know what you did as part of this effort.
That was led by our Research and Strategic Projects Division, and working with our Historic Preservation Office. And I would say it wasn't a case study type of analysis. It was more of a high-level analysis. We don't have that team here today. We're happy to provide some additional information that we could send to the committee that summarizes that work. And they actually do have an additional staff report that summarizes that, so we can share that with the committee.
And if I could, I'm sorry, for the record, Jason Sartori, Chief of Countywide Planning and Policy. I just wanted to highlight again what you see on this slide. One of the things that kind of gets to the point that Director Stern made is that, this was where we see these covenants is really, they're all across the county, this whole down county area. So they were very pervasive. So, and Councilmember Yowondo mentioned that, areas that we know today are very diverse, we see are marked in red here. And so, I think part of the difficulty in trying to see how this plays out today is that this was so pervasive. They were everywhere.
And I just wanted to add, the mapping prejudice project that we talked about out in Minnesota, which did a more detailed analysis on a property-by-property basis, and that's the one Ms. Ballo said, had 33,000 volunteer hours. So it's a much more comprehensive look. And when they examined their data, they found that properties that had 3.4% higher present-day values than houses without restrictive covenants. So if you had the covenants on them today, the values were 3.4% higher. And that every percentage point increase in the number of restrictive covenants on a block, is associated with a 14% drop in black population and a 19% drop in black homeownership compared to the other areas. So in terms of a more comprehensive analysis done in a different part of the country, those were their findings.
Appreciate that. So not from Montgomery County, but helpful analysis on the broader
That just
national
context.
dynamics from another jurisdiction that did a more detailed analysis. I just think it's important for us to reiterate that. If you could send that to the committee, I think that would be very helpful of what the staff report was related to the looking into an exploration of this question of communities with racial covenants and communities without racial covenants. On the map that you have before us, so I just want to make sure. So the gray are subdivisions that now exist, that happened, post 1953. So they wouldn't have had a covenant or no covenant.
So
That was farmland or not platted prior to 1953.
Yeah, so those subdivisions were platted after 1953. Covenants were still being put into deeds until 1968, but the number of covenants we would have had to examine exceeded our capacity to do so. There were so many plats recorded between 1953 and 1968 that due to the FHA's policy in 1950 after Shelley versus Ferguson, where it became unenforceable in 1948, we just wanted to capture a time frame about seeing the decline of covenants being put in. So that's in the map that Ms. Ballow showed, I think it was down to 25% during that time, between 48 and 53. That was just to show that, yes, they are declining. You can no longer put them in if you received an FHA loan, which really limited their use in the county. But individual owners could still put in covenants after that time, all the way up to 1968. They just couldn't be enforced by the judicial system anymore. And so it doesn't mean that there are none. I think as we move forward past 1953, you would find fewer and fewer just because of all those regulations that were trying to stop them. And there were other means of de facto segregation that people were using to continue to discriminate. But that was our endpoint for the research, was 1953.
Appreciate that. And then the possible is a relatively small number. And Ms. Ball, you were talking about this earlier. I just want to make sure I fully understand it. These are areas where you looked at a larger community. Most of the community had covenants. There was a lack of information for this portion of the community. And so the assumption is there's a high possibility that there would have been a covenant, but you have no evidence to prove or disprove it. And could you just confirm that I'm understanding that correctly?
Sure.
And then also just maybe give an example of one of those communities that are listed as a possible?
Absolutely. So offhand, so when we were going through the research, and as Ms. Ballow was saying, there are sometimes, when you plat a subdivision, you'll have 6 different parts of the same community. And it was by the same developer, and for some reason in the historical record, when we went through the land records, we could find it through sections 1 through 5, but section 6, for some reason, we could not find a covenant on those properties. We did not want to label those as no, they had no covenants, since this land developer or property owner had obviously put covenants on all those other properties. And so that is why it was labeled as potentially had covenants. It could have just been an issue with the research, could have been we missed the land record, but it seemed disingenuous to say that, and I think it would have been misleading to say, maybe there's a reason why. And so particularly when we looked at the census population and we started to map African-American home ownership, it's not like we found that small community had African-American home ownership. It was still mostly an all-white population in all instances. And so we put those in the possible category. So which ones offhand, I cannot recall exactly the names of ones offhand, but...
If you give us a moment, we can pull up the GIS map itself and zoom in on one of those possible.
Great, that would be great.
Yeah.
While you're doing that, I'll turn it over. I think Councilmember Jawanda had another follow-up question as well.
Okay. So do you want to describe what you're seeing?
Sure.
We'll turn over to Councilmember Jawanda in a second. We'll let you go forward. Greenwich Forest is a good one because it's actually walking distance to where I live. So I know that neighborhood well.
So here's one for Greenwich Forest, and as you can see, as we pull it up on the map, you can see it's for Greenwich Forest blocks H through L. The property owners was Greenwich Forest Inc. And you can see in the notes, it states that Greenwich Forest added restrictive racial covenants on other plats in the same subdivision. There's a possibility that these properties included racial restrictive covenants, but no such evidence had been found. And so this was just one of the many examples of where we, when we had these possible ones where you can see it's surrounded by racial restrictive covenants, and you just have these small pockets where it's the same developer. There was no instances of African American home ownership here, and so we labeled these as possible that we just missed them in the historic record through our sampling process.
Understood. Okay, helpful. Thank you. Councilmember Joanna.
And I think that's actually a really good segue to, and you said this at the beginning, there are obviously many other formal and informal ways that people were encouraged, restricted, violently denied housing that weren't just racial covenants. You can go in areas of the country and the county today where, like, people are, when someone moves in an HOA with 50 homes, and people are counting how many families, like that's still happening today. And I'm glad you connected it to the home values. I know we don't have that level of data here, but just to connect the larger story that obviously has an impact on the valuation. One of the things I wanted to ask was about HOAs. I didn't see much of that mentioned here, but like the role that when those, other than to the extent that you said people had to form another one because they couldn't be. So was there anything that popped up in the analysis in relation to how HOAs factored into this, or at all?
We don't really have any data to share about that. Again, the team has looked at this anecdotally, thinking it would be interesting to track, for example, the rise of HOAs nationally and regionally as racial restrictive covenants become illegal and unenforceable, and what the interplay of that is, particularly as the rest of the county continues to develop. HOAs are still private contractual agreements in the land records that, as everyone well knows, governs everything from the architectural character of the neighborhood to how high your fences are, all of those factors that still exist. So no, we did not look at that with this project, but it is something that we are very, very aware that there may be some kind of an interplay. Got it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think, again, to my earlier point of, how has, in slavery, Jim Crow, like, how do the things evolve, and how do they change in relation to housing policy is something that I think, we need to be looking into and aware of. Yeah, so thank you.
Okay, well, unless there are other questions or comments, why don't we shift here a little bit to next steps. I think there's really three aspects of this. One is this particular project, what does the next phase look like? What do we want it to focus on? What's the geographic area to focus on, and what are the questions that we'd like to see explored? And then the second piece of this is related to this project, but maybe slightly differently. What are one-off research questions? And I think we've started to hear them already that may not be part of that specific scope, but maybe an interesting area that council members are interested in exploring as less of a formal project and more of just a research area or a question that could potentially be answered as a follow-up item. So with that, Councilmember Fani Gonzalez, I'll turn to you, and then I have some thoughts as well, and I know Councilmember Joanna does also.
I have two issues, besides the fact that I would love to see this type of project in App County. So I guess that will be the third one. That's an obvious one. But something that came to mind as I read this and you guys were talking was the issue of appraisals, how racial bias affects the devaluation of properties, especially in Latino and Black neighborhoods. That's happening today. There has been plenty of news articles and research on this. I'm still not sure what the policy decision should be, So that's something that I don't know if it's exactly on this project, but that's something that I've been thinking about. So that's one. And then the third one, because I already told you the first one will be up county. The third one would be, especially when you go up county, farmers. Who owns the land? And were there any restrictions similar to homes, but also with farming, with farmland? I'm curious about that. So that's it. That's a lot in those three simple questions. So.
Okay, well, appreciate that. I think the question of valuations is a tough one. I'd like to hear from planning whether that's an area of expertise that planning would have and how that would look. To me, that's an entirely separate project, and there's a question to me of whether or not planning is equipped to do that, or whether that's something that we should explore elsewhere. I mean, I think it's a very important question, but I think that's something that you can noodle for a minute if you have an answer, Ms. Stern.
I would say at this point, it's something that would require additional resources, and I'm not certain at the level of analyses that would be needed to do that type of expertise. I think we would definitely need some assistance if we were involved. Another question that came to mind is this something that we could perhaps partner with the Office of Legislative Oversight on, because they also do special studies, or perhaps we could collaborate and just think through what could a scope of this type of project be, and then what type of resources would be needed, and kind of figure out who could do something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I would just add that I think when we did that follow-up analysis, we tried to see, is there any correlation between where we've seen these restrictive covenants and some of the demographics that we see today. We also looked at property values and things like that, and we really couldn't find it at that high level. However, what Mr. Liebert's talked about that they're doing in Minneapolis is that parcel by parcel analysis, where you can follow the parcels that had covenants everywhere, and whether what their values are today. That type of level of detail, we can't really get to that. You saw 30,000 volunteer hours, 6,000 volunteers
Sure.
to be able to gather all of that information at a parcel by parcel level.
The other thing that I think would be related to this, and maybe not as macro, but maybe micro, and more of kind of a case study look, but maybe rather than the unrealistic nature of the entirety of this whole area, I think the map helps to make that point. But perhaps the idea of a case study, if you look at 3 different areas of side by side, or close proximity, neighborhoods that are somewhat similar in terms of the housing type, in terms of the lot size, and you could potentially look at the value of the homes over time. It doesn't have to be all of them. You could take a sampling of that, but just something to think about. I don't know that you're going to be able to dictate that today, but I think the question that was raised earlier about is there a difference between those with restrictions and not restrictions, perhaps those questions of over time, the value over time, the demographics, the timing of people moving in and moving out, the demographic changes, what's realistic and what's reasonable in that. I don't think you could do it for everything because of the constraints that were mentioned earlier, but perhaps a modest case study of 2 or 3 or 4 of these communities. Does that seem reasonable? And then I'm going to turn to Councilmember Toronto. Okay. Yeah, sure. Well, why don't you go, and then we'll let them respond.
I just wanted to just distinguish valuation from appraisal, right? So that the work that's been out, and I think I heard you say appraisal. It's like these houses are selling for more. The contract price is more. If they're just being valued 20% less, which impacts the ability to access loans and financing a whole bunch of things.
Your debt ratio of how much you have to put down.
So that's a problem in and of itself. There is also the larger problem, which I think Councilman Friedman was kind of getting to, of just what the value is and what the houses sell for that are similarly situated based on who lives there, access to transit, job, the things that have developed over time and decisions that were made. But there is a large body of research of which the Washington D.C. area is a part of, with the Brookings study that came out a couple years ago that does talk about the devaluation in the appraisal process of roughly 20-25% in black in neighborhoods of color. So I do think there's a way to get to that and use that data with either with OLO or with UO. I just wanted to point out the difference there.
Yeah, I think the appraisal numbers are going to be harder from a research standpoint of this kind. The sales values are public record, and so that's an easier, more reasonable standpoint. But I turn to the researchers to tell us what's doable and not doable, and even if it's not today, to think through a case study type approach and what you think you reasonably could provide us, and whether or not we think that that's enough to be useful, or whether we think that the staff time would be better used in other ways.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Friesen. One thing that John and I were very acutely aware of when we were doing this project is that the historians had a certain lane, right, with researching the data and the aggregate and mapping it and trying to tell that story and tie it into the national narrative, and then giving that data that we had to the researchers, to the demographers that are in the department, to see what they could make of it. And we look forward to giving you the copy of their report that they transmitted to the planning board. So I do want to make that distinction between what the historians did with this project, what we may be able to contribute to it for a future phase, or if that really is best suited for those who have that technical expertise in real estate valuation and demographics. I will say that when the larger team, when we were looking at the national examples, so aside from the University of Minneapolis and the project out of Minnesota, the Federal Reserve also has a white paper on this topic, and we have a pretty extensive bibliography that looks at their studies. They were able to look at many, many more properties, as Jason had mentioned earlier, and the better your numbers, like the more properties you have to look at, the more extensive and accurate your baseline data, that would help the demographers and the rest of the research team. So just thinking about the character of the subdivisions that were developed in the Down County versus the ones outside the Beltway. The Beltway is very much an artificial dividing line that we created for this project. But starting in the 1950s and then the 1960s, as the subdivisions that come along in the Mid-County, they're very similar to each other in terms of the character. You have whole swaths of ranch-style subdivisions, minimal traditional style subdivisions platted by different people. There is more variety, I think, in the architectural character of the properties within the Beltway. So when you're trying to create comparables, just thinking through this for other researchers or people looking at this, I think that having that sort of baseline historical data for the subdivisions that are most similar, which you find in the Mid-County region, may be helpful for them in trying to pick out those case studies. Whereas if you look at downtown Silver Spring, for example, in the 19-teens, 1920s, the architectural character, the size of the lots can vary greatly from one neighborhood that's just next to another one.
Yeah, appreciate that. Post-World War II, very efficient.
Oh, yeah.
Similar cookie-cutter style of housing development prior to World War II, certainly a much more diverse housing type, individualized dynamic. Appreciate that. So I think let's think through a little bit, if you could, of what case study could look like, being realistic, understanding that it's probably more of a demographer research question than a historic preservation type of question. And if the answer is we just don't think this is something that we can realistically do and provide anything that's, helpful to the public policy making process, that's a good answer too. But I think that would be helpful. I think a long-term question of whether or not OLO or some other report for this in subsequent years, maybe using this as a baseline to help. And then I think taking the point Ms. Ballo raised earlier, maybe that's down the road after we expand the geography and there's more usable historical data that would be helpful for that, because there'll be more comps that are easier to do a side-by-side comparison, whereas the data that exists right now may be a little bit tougher to use. The other piece of that, of course, is whether or not we want to do a map beyond the Beltway, which was originally the plan and the intent of the planning department that came before us. And part of the reason of coming back here is to slow it down, think through what do we have, what do we want to do next, and to have a collaborative effort, which this has been part of. Clearly, Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez has reflected an interest in wanting to see that and do that. I hear from the researchers and the experts that there's a value that you have me convinced as well that there's enough there, even though a large swath of the county prior to this time period for the areas that that 70-year time period that you covered were farms and they were not subdivided and platted. There are a lot of neighborhoods and communities that were, and so there is value there. So I'll just note that. I want to hear from Councilmember Jawanda of what his thoughts are and any other points there. But I think this is a key point that we should speak to. And then I'd like to turn it to you to say, what does that mean? Because we've heard beyond the Beltway and we've heard mid-county, and those, that's part of it, but it's not all of it. And if mid-county is really the area of focus, then I just think it would be helpful for us to be aware of that. But I want to first turn to Councilmember Jawanda for his thoughts and comments.
Yeah, I agree with that. Maybe before I bring up new things in the phase 2, maybe we could hear from you. I agree with my colleagues that in following what you said, that the mid or up county communities, it would be good to have the full complete picture, because communities existed. But maybe we answer that question first of what that would look like in your opinion, and then I'll bring up things that are different from that, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's great. So why don't we turn to planning. You can tell us what you were originally planning and or what you now would like to do, and what area that would cover, and whether or not it would be the exact same as what we see here in just a different geographic area, or whether it would be slightly different or not.
Sure. So I will start with noting, as Ms. Ballo mentioned earlier, there are some parts of the Mid-County where we have found evidence of racially restrictive covenants. So we do have at least some sense of certainly including probably areas of the Mid-County. In terms of up-county or sort of more broadly outside of the Beltway, I think and I will start this and turn it over to the staff in terms of their ideas behind a phase 2. But I think part of it was to start to do the research and start to identify what are some areas that look like they're most maybe likely places where this type of research may be fruitful, just based off of the history of development in the county. I don't think we had sort of specific boundaries of our study area for phase 2 when we initially came to the council and proposed this project. But again, there are certain places where we know some of these covenants exist. It's really more of a question of, do we just focus on those areas, or do we, look into some other parts of the county, outside the Beltway? And I'll turn it over to staff to add to this.
So I think that we've clearly discussed this amongst ourselves. I appreciate the opportunity to have this dialogue. We think that the methodology will hold for the mid-county region, more or less. I will point out too, we have these 3 planning areas, the down county, the mid county, the up county, but we do still have the PAs, the smaller planning areas, those little sub areas. So while I do believe the methodology would hold for the mid-county region, and it may be more fruitful to look at what planning areas perhaps extend a little bit outside the mid-county, technically into the up-county, but the development patterns in those PAs might hold, more for what's happening in the rest of the mid-county. So I think that we understand how to do that work with the resources that we were provided the last time, what the scope of that may look like. We shouldn't forget either that we do have the city of Rockville as part of this history here in the county, and they have their own particular histories with the Lincoln Park community and other citywide policies that may play into this in ways that frankly we have not researched extensively as part of this. Well, we haven't researched that at all as part of that. I'll be very
That was
clear.
going to be my other question when we get into the mid-county, Rockville, Gaithersburg, Washington
Yes.
Grove. I mean, we do have municipalities, you know, some of whom have land use authority, and you know, so the question would be how you would interface with those. And certainly there's some, as you mentioned already, we know the kinship communities in some of these areas are well documented. They still are there. We have done research on them. We have some historic properties, you know, in these areas. So how would that work? Would you consult with them? Would you leave Rockville out because they have their own area? Would we coordinate with them? How would that work?
I think that would largely depend on the resource, how the council would scope this project. If there were to be that type of interjurisdictional coordination with our colleagues in the cities and with their land use offices and their researchers, that would certainly expand the scope, would expand the staff resources and the time, but could also result in some really fruitful research and better fine-grained understanding of these communities. So it would be an expansion of the scope beyond just the mid-county region, being able to drill down on these jurisdictions. That might be its own separate project in and of itself. Like if we were to do a phase 2, for example, that looks at the mid-county region more or less with the methodology we've already developed, and then from there, you know, the next year would be coordinate specifically with the city of Rockville on these particular issues that they may find of use. I think that might be one way forward with it.
Okay, so I would suggest thinking through that a little bit of what that would look like, and maybe coming back to us. I think you've heard from the committee that we clearly would like to see a broadening of the geographic area and a mapping tool that reflects it. I personally can't imagine a mapping tool of the mid-county on these issues that doesn't have Lincoln Park in it. I mean, I just think that I couldn't explain that to a resident. You know, I could try to explain municipal boundaries and you know, the authority vested to us equally by the state, but we got to figure out a way to make this a one-stop shop for residents who are looking for information, for researchers who are looking for information, and for policymakers who are looking for information. So if you could give that some thought and maybe even have some initial conversations with municipal partners to get a sense of, you know, what their interest level is and what that could look like. I think that would be helpful for us to understand. I don't think we have to have a committee briefing on that, but if you could just follow up with us on that, I think that would be helpful. But I think you have an idea of what we're looking for. And then as part of that conversation, once you get a handle on what that would look like, I think the timing and the resources are part of the question here, right? We initially took this up during the budget. We wanted to take some more time to think it through. If, you know, we're going to take the next few months just to figure out what it is we're doing, and then, you know, it wouldn't start until next fiscal year. You know, I think that would make sense. You know, if that's reasonable, if there's a way to start it earlier, let us know. But I think you can take some time to figure out the scope and the dynamics, really think through what level of partnership and involvement of the municipal partners, and come back to us with a thought process of time and resources and reasonable explanation of or expectation of a timeline of, you know, when you would start and when you could finish and when we would have something to work off of. Does that seem reasonable?
It is, and I just wanted to note that we are already starting to gear up for the FY25 budget process. So this is a very timely conversation for us to think through what a scope could be as part of our FY25 budget request.
That was the intention of the timing, so I'm glad to hear that. Appreciate that. So I think on the mapping part of it, I think we're in good shape. I think you have a good understanding of what we're looking for, and we appreciate that. Councilmember Giwando on other items.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that and agree 1,000%. We can't leave out the municipalities that are forming the kinship communities. Just to try to maybe state more clearly some things I alluded to earlier, obviously we live and work on lands that were formerly of the Piscataway Kanoi tribe that were taken from them, then enslaved individuals in Montgomery County worked those lands and plantations and to build this community. And then, I just think it's important to say that anytime we talk about the historical land use and what's happened here. And we should be remembering of that. We just finished a 2-day racial equity training, the council last week, and a lot of these policies came up around who was given access to land and who wasn't, and other benefits that have accrued to Americans. So it's important. And also, I think when you showed that 1890, again, the start of your slide that I just keep thinking about, so 1865 is, Civil War and, Emancipation Proclamation time 2 years earlier. So these are formerly enslaved African Americans who are sharecropping, most likely, that make up the vast majority of those almost 10,000 residents. I think then we go to 1960, and there's only a handful of people that are here, 3%, right? And so I just think our work has to be part of what we need to do, and it's not necessarily in this project, but I think our collective work is continuing to document what happened along the way to lead to, that dramatic loss of land and population. Then post 1960, as we talked about a little earlier, what were the 2.0 or the 3.0 ways of discriminating against folks, some of which we've talked about and we're still talking about, home appraisals, access to loans, that have led to the massive racial wealth gap, the massive home ownership gap that exists for communities of color, for Black and Latino communities and others. So I just want to, I'm not saying we have to scope it out today, but I just want to throw out there, and I'll work with you collaboratively, as I know the committee will, because when we're trying to actualize, okay, what has happened, knowing that is key to, like, what do we do now to correct it, right? If you're trying to address an issue of Black home ownership, for example, right? There's a reason, there's many reasons, this is one of them, why it's so low, and why and which has connections to, so I want us to pull a little more on what are the other policies, particularly in your zone of land use, right? We talked about HOAs, there's other things that perpetuated these inequities much longer than 1960, that we should just try our best to document and plot out, and I would love to see the evolution of that work as we move forward. I hope that makes sense. And yeah.
Appreciate that. Totally agree. I think that's the ongoing work that we'd like to take up in this committee. I think it's a multi-year, multi-decade undertaking, very ambitious but important, and really at the center of the work that we do and land use decisions that we make. I was going to raise something similarly and maybe a slightly more specific, but in the exact same vein as Councilmember Jawanda was noting. And in my head I was thinking 1953 to 1968, but that area there's 15 years that weren't covered because it was too much to cover. But the county saw explosive growth, but it was very specific growth in terms of the type of growth that we saw, in terms of the type of housing and the type of development, but also the type of people. Not just the what, but the who. And so I would like to think through what a next phase of project could look like, to look at that. And I don't think it has to be a mapping question, and I don't think it could be a demographic, question, to the point, that could be less historical and more demographic. But I think embedded into what Councilmember Jawanda was talking about is who moved here, when, why, why didn't they move, just as important as where did people move, where didn't they move, why couldn't they move there? And then the other specific question is really, and you heard it from Councilmember Jawanda earlier, we talked a lot about the East County. You look at the the tool shows broad-based restrictions. And you look at the demographic trends of the county, the racial breakdown of the county was not split among different portions of the county. But that has changed for a lot of reasons. And I think we need to dig deeper into that as well. I think it's important, to think through and to dig a little deeper into the East County, West County question, the idea of not having a growth corridor in the East County. In the western portion of the county, the 270 corridor, you have the corridor cities that are very diverse, actually. It's some of the most important diversity in the county in Rockville and Gaithersburg and Germantown. I don't believe that is by chance. I think it's by choice, by land use policy decisions. And so I thinking through this question of the relevance of these dynamics, where we are today, and unpacking those of how we got here with land use policy decisions, I think are important, because I think the redlining and the racial covenants are an important part of the past that still linger, but there are also a lot of decisions that have been made since then that I think would be helpful to explore as well. And I think the questions of investment and growth are a really important part of that conversation too. So it doesn't have to be today, but I think, as we talk about follow-ups, I think that would be an area that I'd love for you to explore. And I don't know, Mr. Sartori, if you have any thoughts on either Councilmember Jawando or my comments here.
I'm kind of thinking, I'm hearing a lot of the things that we've talked about internally in terms of where this could go. I mean, there are a million different things that we can do, and you're kind of touching on all of them. And so I'm trying to see if, from the perspective of council members who are looking to influence and create policy for the future, a lot of the work that you've seen today and that we've talked about potentially doing in other areas of the county provide a good understanding of our past and our history, and which is all really important for us to have. But are some of the things that you're talking about more valuable to you as in terms of being able to create future policy and new policy? And that's what I'm wondering, Councilmember Jawando, you've talked about this evolution of kind of like the de facto segregation approaches to segregation that we've seen historically. If we focus in on that past, the time period after 1953 and the policies that, and kind of activities that took place, is that something that would be more valuable to the council in terms of creating future policy? Or is it more valuable to you to see where in Up County we've had the existence of racial covenants? The first, that's what I'm thinking too. So I mean, as we try to kind of figure out where we go from here and what we want to propose as part of our work program request and our budget request, that's helpful.
Yeah, and I think that was part of the initial conversations that we had during the budget, and so I appreciate you honing in on that. So I mean, I think the answer is both, but I think if in the interest of prioritizing, I think the latter would be prioritized over the former. I'm seeing colleagues that, actionable issues, we want both. We need it all, but we have to pick and choose when we can get certain things within a time period. So, Ms. Stern.
I just wanted to, again, just remind the committee that we have another division, our Research and Strategic Projects Division, that has our demographic expertise. We have a real estate specialist and economic analysis as well. And so, again, as I mentioned earlier, they worked on sort of the part two of this initial work to look at sort of, is there an impact of racially restrictive covenants that we could see in the present day communities that had these covenants. But in terms of going back and thinking through, based off of what we've heard from the committee, what would be a scope or multiple scopes or projects, I definitely want to make sure that they're a part of this conversation, because particularly if we're going to be looking at both demographic and real estate related issues, they will be a part of the team and they can help to think through, what are some ways that we could try to tackle this.
Great. So you're going to go back and talk to them, get a sense of what you think would be helpful, and you'll propose to us in both veins, and I think prioritizing those issues and making sure that we have a timeline that is reasonable, that you can actually pull off and execute, which we're sensitive to as well. We know that there are limited resources, and these projects are a tremendous undertaking, and there's a huge amount of expertise and effort that goes into it, which we very much appreciate. So if you go back, think through that as you develop your budget. We've, I think, made ourselves fairly clear here of what we'd like to see and what we'd be interested in and what we think would be most useful and helpful. And just come back to us in the interim before the budget starts with some ideas and a scope, and we can follow up with any additional comments or questions that we have at that point.
We'd be happy to do that.
Great. All right. With that, thank you again. I want to acknowledge Artie Harris, Chair of the Planning Board, who's joined us here as well. Job well done. The team did well, so we appreciate that. Thanks to the staff for all of your efforts, and look forward to follow-up conversations. Obviously, this is just part of an ongoing effort and a lot of continued work to be intentional about the efforts that we take in land use planning at the planning department, at the county council, and in the county more broadly, and really appreciate everybody's shared commitment and interest in these issues. So thank you, and we are now adjourned.